Hi, you guys. The Lord gave me a word a couple weeks ago um, when I was in prayer and just crying out to Him because I just been in a place that felt like I've been going through a lot of warfare and I was struggling to hear from God and in all of the ways that I was used to hearing from God. So I was just crying out to the Lord in prayer and I heard Him say harvest. But when I heard it, what came to my spirit wasn't just simply reaping a harvest. It was more about the fruit of the spirit. And God made it clear to me that He was harvesting a particular fruit of His Holy Spirit within me in the process of what I was going through at the time. And I believe that many have been going through that or just recently came out of a situation like that. So I really just want to share this word with you all to encourage those who are just coming out of that or are in the midst of that process. So I pray that this does encourage those who it is meant for. I pray that you all receive it. So let's get into the word. I'm going to be reading from Matthew chapter 13, verses 24 through 30. And the Lord titled this word, Everything Must Go. In the CSB, Matthew 13, verse 24 through 30 reads, He presented another parable to them. The kingdom of heaven may be compared to a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while people were sleeping, his enemy came, sowed weeds among the wheat, and left. When the plants sprouted and produced grain, then the weeds also appeared. The landowner's servants came to him and said, Master, didn't you sow good seed in your field? Then where did the weeds come from? An enemy did this, he told them. So do you want us to go and pull them up? The servants asked him. No, he said. When you pull up the weeds, you might also uproot the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. At harvest time, I'll tell the reapers, gather the weeds first and tie them in bundles to burn them, but collect the wheat in my barn. And in the KJV, verse 26, Matthew 13, verse 26 reads, But when the blade was sprung up and brought forth fruit, then appeared the tares also. So the overall message to this word is the place that has felt like a pit was actually a place of buried seed, good seed. Father has been developing and cultivating the fruit of His Holy Spirit within you. Now He is harvesting what He has produced. And I'm just going to go through verse by verse and share what Father gave to me as I was reading and spending time with Him in this passage. So verse 26, what the Lord put on my spirit was that the weeds didn't come until you started to sprout and produce. Weeds grow fast, so you would think that you would think that the weeds would have appeared before the wheat did. The Lord had to reveal to you what was planted by Him and what is not of Him before the uprooting occurred, before the harvest. Had God only brought up the weeds, you would have doubted your good soil. Condemnation and shame has kept you from seeing that you are good soil. God allowed both to sprout together so you could see the distinction. In verse 27, when the servants came to the landowner and asked him about the seed and about the weeds, what God gave to me was that weeds can cause people to, one, question the planter, and two, doubt the integrity of the seed. The servant said, Master, didn't you sow good seed in your field? Then where did the weeds come from? So they questioned the seed as they questioned the integrity of the seed, whether or not it was good, as they were questioning the planter, the landowner, saying, did you not sow good seed? Then where did the weeds come from? So the Lord is saying that weeds will cause people to question the planter and to doubt the integrity of the seed. What is produced reflects the producer or the planter. The presence of the weeds made the planter look incompetent and the seed look inadequate. These were weeds of doubt that were meant to taint or tarnish seeds of faith. Verse 28, when the servants asked the landowner if he wanted them to pull up the weeds, what the Lord shared with me was that the servants were ready to uproot the weeds, which would have directly affected the crop. The enemy tried to destroy your faith seed by keeping you focused on the weeds. Doubt will have you making the wrong moves and going in the wrong direction, ultimately diminishing your faith. In verse 29, when the planter responded, or the landowner responded, he said, no, if you uproot the weeds, you may also uproot the wheat or the crop. What the Lord spoke to me was that the roots of a weed run deep. Roots intertwine underground. Uprooting the weeds too soon would have caused delay and stagnation. So what the Lord was saying to me on this part was that he allowed the weeds that were sown by the enemy to grow at the same time as the fruit that he planted, as the seed that he planted within you, because he didn't want to start to uproot those weeds and deal with that while he was continuing to grow you and cultivate what he planted within you. Those roots weren't deep enough yet. What the roots of what the Lord planted from those seeds, the seeds from the fruits of the Spirit, when the Lord planted that, those roots hadn't taken root deep enough yet for him to start to uproot the weeds planted by the enemy. Whatever those weeds may be for you, the Lord allowed those to remain while he was growing and cultivating the fruits of his Holy Spirit within you, because he didn't want to deal with the weeds and affect the fruit. In verse 30, the owner says to let them both grow together until harvest. And then at harvest time, he would tell the reapers to gather the weeds first, to tie them up in a bundle, burn them, and then to put the wheat in the barn. What the Lord spoke to me on that was that the planter wasn't bothered by the weeds. He was confident in the seed and the soil. So there are two things that the Lord brought to my spirit on this verse. One, he's not concerned with whatever the enemy planted. He's going to deal with that. And two, he said, you're producing right now. You've already produced something. Many have been pregnant and don't even realize it. But before you can reap the harvest, you must first gather up the weeds and throw them in the fire. So the process of harvest, the steps of harvest, is to first deal with the weeds. Now that the fruit that the Lord planted, now that what the Lord planted within you has grown and is ready to be reaped in harvest, now the Lord is able to deal with the weeds. Because during harvest, everything must go. Everything is uprooted. Everything is taken up from the ground. So at that time, then the Lord will deal with the weeds first before dealing with the fruit. Then the crop will be taken up into the storehouse. Once the weeds are uprooted, then you can see the beauty and glory in his fruit within you. Then the Lord brought something to me. He had me go to Genesis chapter 3, verse 17. And this is the second part of that verse, where it says, God says to Adam, the ground is cursed because of you. You will eat from it by means of painful labor all the days of your life. And then he had me to go up one verse to Genesis 3:16, the first part of that verse, where he addresses Eve. And he says, God tells Eve, I will intensify your labor pains. You will bear children through painful effort. What the Lord spoke to me on that was that you will produce through the pain of labor. And he emphasized will, because that is the promise. That is his decree. You will produce through the pain of labor. That is the process of production. The pain is a requirement because God made a decree after sin entered into the world. The weeds and the pain are an indicator that you have already produced fruit. As it said in verse 26, when the fruit sprouted, then the weeds appeared. The pain is the harvest. Uprooting the wheat and the weeds require the same process. It feels the same to the soil. During harvest, everything must go. And then the Lord brought me to Luke chapter 8, verse 15. And that reads, but the seed in the good ground, these are the ones who, having heard the word with an honest and good heart, hold on to it and by enduring produce fruit. That is an indicator that you are good soil. And this is referring back to verse 30, where it said that he would instruct the reapers to gather up the weeds, tie them up in a bundle, and throw them into the fire. The Lord is saying, when you enter your harvest season and you start to feel the pain of the uprooting, start binding and casting out whatever your weeds may be. Weeds can be difficult to get rid of because, again, their roots run deep. And oftentimes they continue to come back. And this is basically the Lord saying that weeds are attached to evil or unclean spirits. Those weeds, whatever the weeds are for you, they can be attached to unclean spirits. And so you have to bind those unclean spirits. You have to bind whatever it is that came in through those spirits, bind it up, cast it out, and cast it into the abyss, cast it into the fire, so that they will no longer vex you, so that they will no longer be able to have an effect on you, on your crop, on your harvest, on the fruit that God put within you. And then the Lord brought me to Matthew chapter 12, verse 43 through 45. And that reads, when an unclean spirit comes out of a person, it roams through waterless places looking for rest, but doesn't find any. Then it says, I'll go back to my house that I came from. Returning, it finds the house vacant, swept, and put in order. Then it goes and brings with it 7 other spirits more evil than itself, and they enter and settle down there. As a result, that person's last condition is worse than the first. That's how it will also be with this evil generation. Lord is saying with that part is that you need to deal with it by binding it up and casting it out, so that those unclean spirits, those weeds, don't return with more. When you think about weeds, when you see one weed, you can try to kill it or pull it up, but then out of nowhere 2 more come back, or 3 more, or more come back than the first one that you had to deal with in the first place. So that's why the Lord brought that up to me with verse 30, because he's saying, when you notice that you're feeling the pain from the harvest, the uprooting, which feels the same to the soil. We are the soil. Our spirit is good soil. God has called us and created us to be good soil. When you start to feel that, because it feels the same when he's uprooting the weeds or the wheat, the fruit, the crop, start to bind and cast out those evil spirits so that they don't return with more. And then the Lord spoke to me, I am tilling the soil. And I am not, I don't have a green thumb. I don't know anything about gardening or anything like that. So I had to refer to Google to get some more revelation on this part. And so I looked up I looked up what the process of tilling is, and I found an article. And as I was reading the article, the Lord started to give me further revelation of what He spoke. And in the article, it said the purpose of tilling. It gave 4 purposes of tilling soil. And it said, 1 is to mix organic matter into your soil. And the Lord is saying that He is filling you back up right now. And the second purpose that was listed in the article said to help control weeds. The Lord said, the enemy you see today, you shall see no more. The third purpose for tilling soil is to break up crusted soil. And the Lord is saying that He's softening the hardened areas that came from your process, that came from your growth process, your cultivation process. The Lord is softening those hardened areas, those bitter areas, those areas of resentment, those areas of shame and condemnation, all of those things that created a hardened part, that create all of those areas that harden your heart. He's dealing with that by tilling the soil. He's softening those areas. And then finally, the fourth purpose that was listed is to loosen up a small area for planting. And the Lord said He's preparing you for more seed. We should always be in a process of producing good harvest, of growing fruit, growing a harvest from the good seed that the Lord has planted within us. So by the Lord tilling the soil, He is the weeds and the wheat or the crop has been uprooted. So He's tilling the soil and putting good seed back into the ground, back into the good soil. And then finally, what the article said about how do you know when to begin working the soil or tilling the soil? It said to take a handful and squeeze it into a ball, then press your fingers slightly against the ball. If the ball crumbles, it is time. And Father says, you're not falling apart. He is tilling the soil. So I'm going to leave you with 2 more scriptures to close out this word. The first comes from John 15, verses 1 and 2. It says, I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. Every branch in me that does not produce fruit, He removes. And He prunes every branch that produces fruit so that it will produce more fruit. And then the last verse is Isaiah 27, verse 6. And it says, in days to come, Jacob will take root. Israel will blossom and bloom and fill the whole world with fruit. I pray that this word encouraged you all as it encouraged me. Take this word back to the Lord. Sit before Him with this word and just let Him minister to you. Let Him encourage you. Let Him just love on you right now. I pray that you all receive this. Until next time, I love you guys. Bye.